I was at Redstone Ranch in the dry Texas interior on that late afternoon that turned everything golden and silent. I'd come to evaluate some animals for the state auction, but it didn't take long to realize something different was happening. My name is Daniel Cross, and I'd been evaluating cattle for 20 years, long enough to know the difference between an animal that was weak and one that was simply waiting, long enough to recognize arrogance when I saw it in a man, and power when I saw it in a bull. The sun was dropping toward the horizon, painting the mesquite trees in shades of copper and casting long shadows across the corrals. Redstone Ranch sprawled across 5,000 acres of Texas hill country, and Clayton Harrow owned every inch of it. More importantly, he wanted everyone to know he owned it. In the center of the main corral, Clayton stood holding court like he always did, a tall man in his 50s, wearing a white Stetson that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, boots polished to a shine that looked ridiculous in a working ranch. He loved being feared, loved being the richest cattle magnate in 3 counties, loved the sound of his own voice echoing across his property. And right now, he was laughing. "Look at this!" Clayton shouted, waving his expensive hat at a spotted bull that stood in the corner of the corral. "They sold me this useless piece of meat thinking I was an idiot. He probably doesn't have the strength to push a calf around." The ranch hands laughed nervously. That's what you did when Clayton Harrow told a joke. You laughed, whether it was funny or not, whether it was cruel or not. I didn't laugh. I was too busy looking at the bull. His name was Rustfire. I'd seen it on the transport documents I was supposed to review. The name came from the rust-colored spots that covered his back and sides, irregular patches that made him look mottled, different, somehow wrong to people who thought cattle should look a certain way to have value. But Rustfire wasn't standing like a weak animal. He stood completely still, yes, but not from weakness, from control. Like someone enduring mockery because they knew exactly what they were capable of and didn't need to prove it to anyone. His muscles were defined under that spotted hide. His stance was balanced, weight distributed perfectly. His eyes, dark and calm, watched everything without seeming to watch anything at all. This wasn't a defective bull. This was a bull who was choosing to be still. "Mr. Harrow," I started, stepping forward. "I think you might want to reconsider." "Cross, you're here to evaluate, not to give me advice on my own stock." Clayton cut me off, not even looking at me. "I know a dud when I see one. This animal's going straight to beef processing, won't even make it to the auction ring." Miguel, one of the senior hands I'd worked with before on other ranches, was trying to move a nervous calf back into the smaller pen. I watched him struggle with the gate. The latch was bent, the whole mechanism tilted at an angle that made it unstable. I saw the problem developing seconds before it happened. The calf, spooked by the shouting and laughter, made a break for it. The gate swung wide, the bent latch giving way completely, and the calf bolted straight across the corral. Young cattle can move fast when they're scared, and this one was terrified. It lowered its head and charged, not at anyone specifically, just away from the noise and the people and the fear, straight toward Clayton Harrow. The cattle magnate took a step backward, supremely confident in his ability to handle any situation, but his expensive boot heel caught on a rock he'd never noticed because men like Clayton didn't look down. He stumbled, arms windmilling for balance, and fell backward onto the packed dirt. The calf kept coming. Clayton's eyes went wide. He tried to roll sideways, but his body wouldn't cooperate fast enough. The other ranch hands were too far away. Miguel shouted something in Spanish that sounded like a prayer. That's when I saw Rustfire change. The stillness that had defined him shattered like glass. Every muscle in that spotted body coiled and released in one explosive motion. The ground actually trembled. I felt it through my boots. Dust rose in a cloud that caught the golden afternoon light and turned it to fire. I had evaluated cattle for 2 decades, had seen bulls charge, had seen horses bolt, had witnessed every kind of animal movement that existed on working ranches across Texas. I had never seen anything this fast. Rustfire covered the distance between his corner and the center of the corral in what felt like a single heartbeat. His hooves hit the ground with the force of hammers, each step perfectly placed, his body moving with a precision that seemed impossible for something that size. The spotted bull intercepted the calf 3 feet from where Clayton lay sprawled and stunned. Rustfire used his own body like a wall, angling himself between the charging calf and the fallen man, then twisted with impossible agility and shouldered the smaller animal aside. The calf skidded sideways, redirected safely away from Clayton, and Rustfire planted all four hooves with such force that the wooden fence posts vibrated. The entire incident, from the calf's escape to Rustfire's intervention, had taken maybe 4 seconds. The silence that followed felt sacred. Clayton lay on the ground, chest heaving, staring up at the spotted bull who stood over him like a guardian. The bull who he'd called useless. The bull who'd just saved his life. Miguel was the first to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. Dios mío, he saved him. The bull saved the old man. And he had. The spotted bull, the one Clayton Harrow had mocked as worthless trash minutes earlier, had just proven himself to be the strongest, fastest, most precise animal on the entire ranch. Possibly the most valuable bull in 3 counties. Clayton got slowly to his feet, his white Stetson lying forgotten in the dirt. His face had gone pale under his permanent rancher's tan. I didn't know he was like that, he managed, his voice cracking like he'd forgotten how to speak. But Rustfire didn't care about apologies or shock or belated recognition. The spotted bull simply shook his massive head once, took a deep breath that expanded his entire chest, and walked calmly back to his corner of the corral. Back to the same patient silence he'd held before, as if saving a man's life was just something he did when it needed doing, not something that required acknowledgement or praise. The ranch hands stood frozen, processing what they'd witnessed. Miguel crossed himself. Another hand, Tommy Burke, just kept whispering Jesus Christ over and over like a mantra. I walked over to Clayton, who was still staring at Rustfire with an expression I'd never seen on his face before. Something that might have been shame mixed with disbelief, mixed with the terrible knowledge that he'd been completely, utterly wrong. Mr. Harrow, I said quietly. I think we need to talk about that bull. Clayton nodded slowly, unable to take his eyes off Rustfire. Yeah, I think we do. As the sun continued its descent toward the horizon, painting everything in shades of gold and red that matched the spots on Rustfire's hide, I realized something important. True power doesn't need to show off. It doesn't need to prove itself with noise or display or arrogance. True power waits quietly in the corner, watching, assessing, conserving its strength until the exact moment it's needed. And then it moves with a speed and precision that takes everyone's breath away. Rustfire had chosen his moment perfectly. And in doing so, he'd taught every person on that ranch, especially Clayton Harrow, a lesson about judging by appearances that none of them would ever forget. The sun had fully set by the time Clayton Harrow finally spoke again. We were in his office, a room decorated with expensive leather furniture and photographs of prize-winning bulls that had made him his fortune. Clayton sat behind his desk, still wearing dirt on his expensive jeans, his white Stetson sitting on the desk with a smudge across the brim that he kept staring at like he'd never seen dirt before. Miguel stood near the door, hat in his hands. I sat across from Clayton with Rustfire's transport document spread between us. Tell me about him, Clayton said finally, his voice different than I'd ever heard it, quieter, almost humble. I pulled out the paperwork. Rustfire, 3 years old, came from a small ranch operation up in the Panhandle, place called Cedar Ridge. They were selling off their herd, going out of business. He was part of a batch purchase you made last month. I didn't even look at him, Clayton admitted. My foreman handled the whole transaction. I just saw the spotted hide when he arrived and assumed... He trailed off, shaking his head. You assumed he was defective, I finished for him, because he didn't look like what you expected. Clayton's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. What else do the papers say? I scanned the documents more carefully, finding details I'd glossed over during my initial review. Sire is listed as Thornridge Commander. Dam is... Wait, I stopped, reading the name again to make sure I'd seen it correctly. What? Clayton leaned forward. His dam is listed as Copper Valley Queen. Mr. Harrow, do you know that bloodline? Clayton's expression changed completely. Copper Valley Queen? That can't be right. That line was supposed to have died out 15 years ago. Are you certain? It's right here in the breeding records. I turned the document so he could see it. Miguel stepped closer, curious despite himself. What's special about that line, Senor Cross? Copper Valley Queen was descended from one of the most legendary bull lines in Texas history, I explained. Back in the 1950s, there was a bull named Red River King, fastest, strongest animal anyone had ever seen. He produced calves that were worth fortunes, but the line was thought to have ended when his last known descendant died without recorded offspring. But if Rustfire is descended from that line, Clayton's voice trailed off as understanding dawned. Then those spots aren't a defect, I said. They're a genetic marker. Red River King had rust-colored spotting. It was one of his identifying characteristics. People back then considered it a sign of the bloodline's power. The room went silent as the implications settled over us. Clayton stood abruptly and walked to his window, looking out toward the corrals where Rustfire stood in the darkness, barely visible under the ranch's security lights. I called him worthless. I was going to send him to processing. And he's descended from Red River King. More than that, I said carefully. He just demonstrated the exact traits that made that bloodline legendary: explosive speed, precision movement, and the intelligence to assess and respond to danger in seconds. Mr. Harrow, that bull might be the most valuable animal you've ever owned. Miguel cleared his throat. Senor Harrow, the men, they are all talking about what happened. Word is spreading to the other ranches. By tomorrow, everyone in 3 counties will know about the spotted bull who saved your life. Clayton turned from the window, and for the first time since I'd known him, he looked uncertain. What do I do, Cross? It was an honest question from a man who'd built his entire identity on always knowing the answer. You start by treating him with the respect he deserves, I said simply. And you figure out what kind of man you want to be when this story gets told, because Miguel's right, it's going to get told. The question is whether you're the villain who mocked him or the man who learned from him. Clayton absorbed that, his fingers drumming on his desk in a nervous rhythm I'd never seen from him before. The state auction is in 2 weeks. Yes, sir. If word gets out about his bloodline, about what he did today... Clayton's business mind was working now, calculating. He'd be the centerpiece of the auction, could fetch 200,000, maybe more. Easily, I agreed, but everyone would know I tried to discard him. They'd know I didn't see his value. Clayton's voice was bitter now, tasting his own medicine. They would, I confirmed. Unless what? Unless you make this right before the auction. Show everyone that you learned something today, that you're capable of recognizing when you've made a mistake. Clayton sat back down heavily in his chair. And how exactly do I do that? Start by moving him out of that corner pen, Miguel said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. The ranch hand shifted uncomfortably under our attention but continued. Give him the respect his bloodline deserves. The main pasture, the good feed. Let the other hand see that you value him. Smart, I said, nodding at Miguel. And there's something else. Tomorrow morning, I suggest you go out to that corral yourself. Not with your foreman, not with a crowd. Just you, and you thank him. Thank a bull? Clayton looked at me like I'd suggested something impossible. Yes, thank the bull who saved your life despite how you treated him. It doesn't matter if he understands the words. What matters is that you understand them. That you mean them. Clayton stared at me for a long moment, then slowly nodded. All right, I'll do it. Tomorrow morning. Just me and Rustfire. He said the name carefully, like he was testing how it felt in his mouth. Good, I said, gathering up the documents. Because this isn't just about one bull anymore, Mr. Harrow. Every person who works on this ranch saw what happened today. They saw Rustfire save you after you'd humiliated him. They're watching to see what kind of man you are when you're wrong. When you're humbled, this is your chance to show them something worth seeing. Miguel left first, and I was packing up my evaluation materials when Clayton spoke again. Cross, can I ask you something? Sure. That bull, when he moved today, how did he know? How did he know to save me when I'd treated him like garbage? I paused at the door, thinking about Rustfire standing calm in his corner. Those intelligent eyes watching everything. That patient strength waiting for its moment. I don't think it was about you, Mr. Harrow. I think it was about who he is. Some animals, some people too, they do the right thing, not because of what they'll get for it, but because it's simply who they are. Rustfire didn't save you for gratitude or reward. He saved you because saving is what strong beings do for weak ones when the moment requires it. I left Clayton alone with that thought, and when I walked past the corrals on my way to my truck, I stopped to look at Rustfire one more time. The spotted bull stood in the darkness, his rust-colored patches barely visible under the dim security lights. But his eyes caught the light, reflecting it back like amber, and for just a moment, I could have sworn he looked directly at me, as if he knew exactly what had just happened in Clayton's office, as if he'd been waiting all along for the humans to figure out what he'd known from the beginning. That true value has nothing to do with appearance, that real power doesn't need to announce itself, and that sometimes the ones we dismiss are the ones carrying the greatest strength. Tomorrow would bring new revelations, the state auction would bring new challenges, but tonight, a spotted bull named Rustfire stood in the Texas darkness, patient and powerful, waiting for whatever came next, just like he'd always been waiting. Dawn came to Redstone Ranch with the kind of quiet that felt like the world was holding its breath. I arrived early, wanting to see if Clayton would follow through on his promise. From my truck, I watched the main house until the door opened and the cattle magnate stepped out, alone, no entourage, no audience, just a man in simple work clothes walking toward the corrals. Clayton stopped at Rustfire's pen. The spotted bull stood in the corner as always, patient and still. But when Clayton approached the fence, Rustfire turned his head slightly, those intelligent eyes focusing on the man who'd mocked him yesterday. I couldn't hear what Clayton said. The distance was too great and his voice was too quiet. But I saw him remove his hat, a gesture of respect I'd never witnessed from him before. I saw him place both hands on the fence rail and lean forward, speaking for several long minutes. Rustfire didn't move closer, didn't acknowledge the words in any obvious way. He simply stood there, listening or not listening, accepting or not accepting. It didn't matter which. What mattered was that Clayton stayed. He didn't rush through some rehearsed apology and leave. He stood at that fence for nearly 20 minutes, and when he finally walked away, his shoulders looked different, less rigid, less defended, like a man who'd put down a weight he'd been carrying too long. By mid-morning, Miguel and 2 other hands were moving Rustfire to the main pasture, the premium grazing land Clayton usually reserved for his prize breeding stock. Word had spread through the ranch overnight, just as Miguel predicted. Every worker knew what had happened, and they watched the spotted bull's relocation with knowing glances. Tommy Burke, the youngest hand, approached me as I was reviewing paperwork. "Mr. Cross, is it true? About Rustfire's bloodline?" "It's true. He's descended from Red River King." Tommy whistled softly. "And Mr. Harrow was going to send him to processing?" "He was. But people can learn, Tommy, even proud people. Even people who think they know everything." I nodded toward Clayton, who was watching Rustfire settle into the main pasture. "Watch what he does next. That'll tell you what kind of man he really is." What Clayton did next surprised everyone. He called a ranch meeting. Every hand, every worker gathered in the equipment barn while Clayton stood before them, hat in hand. "Yesterday I made a serious mistake," he began, his voice steady but lacking its usual commanding edge. "I judged an animal by his appearance and nearly cost myself my life. That bull, Rustfire, saved me despite my ignorance, despite my cruelty." The workers shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the Clayton Harrow they knew. "I'm telling you this because I want you to learn from my mistake, not repeat it," Clayton continued. "Value isn't always obvious. Strength doesn't always look like we expect it to, and sometimes the ones we dismiss are the ones carrying the greatest power." He looked toward the main pasture where Rustfire grazed peacefully. "That spotted bull taught me something yesterday. He taught me that real strength doesn't need to prove itself with noise or show. It waits quietly until it's needed, and then it acts with a precision that takes your breath away." Miguel caught my eye across the barn and nodded slowly. This was the beginning of something. Not redemption, perhaps. That would take longer. But recognition, humility, change. The state auction was still 2 weeks away, and Rustfire's story was spreading beyond Redstone Ranch like wildfire across dry Texas grass. By the time that auction arrived, every buyer in 3 states would know about the spotted bull who saved the man who mocked him. They'd know about his legendary bloodline, his impossible speed, his quiet power. But more than that, they'd know about Clayton Harrow learning to see value where he'd seen only flaws. And that story, I suspected, might end up being worth even more than Rustfire's price tag. 2 weeks passed like pages turning in a book everyone wanted to read. Rustfire's story spread across Texas, ranchers sharing it over morning coffee, buyers discussing it at livestock markets, reporters from agricultural publications calling Clayton for interviews. The spotted bull who'd saved the magnate who mocked him became something larger than a single incident. It became a legend. The state auction was held at the Fort Worth Stock Show, a massive facility where the best cattle in Texas competed for attention and premium prices. I arrived early on auction day to find the holding pens already crowded with buyers, all of them asking the same question. "Where's the spotted bull?" Clayton had transported Rustfire personally, refusing to let any hauling service handle him. When the bull arrived, a crowd gathered immediately. People wanted to see the animal with their own eyes, to witness the rust-colored spots that marked legendary bloodline, to watch him move with that patient stillness that hid explosive power. "He doesn't look like much standing still," one buyer commented. "That's the point," another replied. "Power that has to show off isn't real power." Clayton stood near Rustfire's pen, answering questions with a humility I'd never witnessed in him before. When someone asked about the incident, he didn't embellish or minimize. He told the truth simply. "I judged him wrongly. He saved me anyway. That's the kind of character you can't breed for. It's just who he is." The auction started at noon. Rustfire was lot 47, positioned in the premium section where only the most valuable animals were featured. The auctioneer, a woman named Sarah Chen, who'd been calling cattle sales for 30 years, knew exactly what she had. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sarah announced as Rustfire was led into the ring, "this is Rustfire, descended from Red River King, demonstrated speed and strength that has become legendary in just 2 weeks. Opening bid is $50,000. The number on the board jumped immediately. 60,000. 75. 100. Buyers competed aggressively, each wanting to own a piece of living history. The price climbed steadily. 125, 150, 175, 200,000. Then something unexpected happened. A young rancher named Marcus Webb stood from his seat in the back. 250,000, he called clearly. "And I have a condition." The room went silent. Conditional bids weren't typical at auctions like this. "Go ahead, Mr. Webb," Sarah said carefully. Marcus looked directly at Clayton. "If I win this bid, I want Mr. Harrow to partner with me. Not just sell me the bull, work with me to establish a proper breeding program using Rustfire's bloodline, share what he's learned, help rebuild the Red River King line the right way." Clayton's expression shifted. This wasn't about money anymore. This was about legacy, about doing right by the animal who'd saved him and the bloodline he represented. "Mr. Harrow?" Sarah prompted. Clayton walked to the auction ring's edge, looking at Rustfire standing calm in the center, those intelligent eyes watching everything. The bull who'd taught him that value had nothing to do with appearance, that true strength was patient and purposeful. "I accept," Clayton said firmly. 250,000, and I'll personally work with Mr. Webb to honor this animal's lineage properly." "Sold." Sarah brought her gavel down with finality. The crowd applauded, not just for the price, but for what it represented. A magnate learning humility, a young rancher showing respect, a spotted bull bringing out the best in everyone who encountered him. Later, as Rustfire was being prepared for transport to his new home, Clayton approached me one final time. "Thank you, Cross, for making me see what I was blind to." "I didn't make you see anything, Mr. Harrow. Rustfire did that. I just pointed out what was already there." We watched as Marcus Webb stood beside Rustfire, speaking quietly to the bull, his hand resting on that spotted shoulder. "He'll do right by him," Clayton said, and there was peace in his voice. "Yes," I agreed. "He will." And as the Texas sun set on the auction grounds, painting everything in shades of gold and rust, I thought about how one spotted bull had changed everything. not through force or display, but through patient, purposeful strength that waited for exactly the right moment to reveal itself. 6 months later, I returned to what was now called the Webb-Harrow Ranch, a partnership that had surprised everyone except those who'd witnessed Rustfire's moment. Marcus Webb's operation had tripled in size, not through aggressive expansion, but through reputation. Ranchers from across the Southwest wanted offspring from Rustfire's line, wanted to work with people who valued character as much as pedigree. And Clayton? He'd transformed his entire approach to ranching. The man who'd once judged animals by appearance alone now spent hours evaluating temperament, intelligence, and heart. His ranch hands spoke of him differently now, with respect earned rather than fear enforced. "Mr. Cross," Marcus called when he saw me, walking over with genuine warmth. "Come see what we've accomplished." In the main pasture, Rustfire stood surrounded by his first offspring, calves carrying those distinctive rust-colored spots that had once been mocked as defects. Each one moved with that same patient strength, that quiet power their father embodied. 12 healthy calves so far, Marcus said proudly. Every single one shows the traits we hoped for. Speed, intelligence, and something else. Something we can't quite measure, but everyone recognizes when they see it. "Character," I said simply. "Exactly." Clayton emerged from the barn, his expensive Stetson replaced with a simple work hat, his polished boots traded for broken-in ones marked with honest dirt. When he saw me, he actually smiled, something I'd rarely seen in all the years I'd known him. "Cross, good to see you." He shook my hand firmly. "Come to evaluate our progress?" "Just wanted to see how things turned out." "Better than I deserved," Clayton said, and there was no false humility in his voice. Just truth. "That bull taught me more than any book or mentor ever could. He taught me that value isn't what you see on the surface. It's what reveals itself when it matters most." We walked to Rustfire's pasture together, Clayton, Marcus, and me. The spotted bull grazed peacefully, occasionally lifting his head to watch his offspring with what I chose to believe was contentment. "You know what's amazing?" Marcus said. "People come from hundreds of miles away just to see him. Not to buy, just to witness. They've heard the story, and they want to see the bull who changed everything." "He didn't change everything," Clayton corrected gently. "He just revealed what was always true. We were the ones who had to change." As I prepared to leave that afternoon, I stopped one final time at Rustfire's fence. The bull walked over, the first time he'd approached me voluntarily in all our encounters. I reached out slowly, and he let me rest my hand on his spotted shoulder. Under my palm, I felt the strength that had saved a life, the power that had rebuilt a legacy, the quiet force that had taught pride its limits. "You did good, Rustfire," I told him. "You showed us all what real strength looks like." Those intelligent eyes met mine for a long moment, and I understood something fundamental. Rustfire had never needed our validation. He'd known his worth all along. He'd simply waited for us to catch up. As I drove away from Webb-Harrow Ranch, watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in shades of gold and rust, I thought about lessons learned and lives changed. About a spotted bull who'd been dismissed and disrespected, but had responded with grace instead of bitterness. About how true power doesn't announce itself, it simply waits, patient and purposeful, until the moment arrives to prove what it's always been. And about how sometimes the ones we judge most harshly are the ones carrying the greatest wisdom. Rustfire's legacy wasn't just in his offspring or his price tag or his legendary bloodline. It was in every person who learned to see value beyond appearance, strength beyond show, and power in patience. That was the real inheritance. And it would last far longer than any fortune.